evening, everyone. This is Andrea Barnett. I'm the supervisor of gifted education. I'm so glad that all you guys could be here tonight. And I want to welcome you to our presentation. Actually, I started sharing, but I'm going to stop sharing so that I can introduce all of our gifted specialist team. As I shared, I am the supervisor of gifted education, and we have now 8 gifted specialists who support our 45 schools. So our panelists are Becky Byers, Chris Brewer, Molly Gettle, Selena Howard, Karen Palmer, she's having some camera difficulty today, Melanie Manning, Meredith Correa, Robin Perrier. So we're all very happy to be here with you tonight, and we want to share some information with you that we hope will help your student have an even more successful school year this year. So these are the things that we're hoping to accomplish tonight. We want you guys to have a good understanding of how your child's instruction will be delivered. We want to share a little bit about the characteristics of gifted students and explore what your child will learn. And we want to give you some information about how you can support your students throughout the school year. We'll start with where and when those services take place. So our model of gifted instruction is gifted cluster grouping, which means that our identified students, most of you are here tonight because you have a 3rd grade student who was recently identified, but we also have some families here, families who were identified in later grades. So this is our model for grades 3 through 8. And our students are clustered into certain classes so that they are with their intellectual peers as well as their age peers. And they're clustered together in a classroom. And the classroom teacher is the primary deliverer of that gifted service. That means that in the classroom, the classroom teacher is supported by the gifted specialist, but the idea is that their gifted services take place each day in the classroom as guided by the classroom teacher. And we use a model that is called concept-based curriculum, but the specialists are there to provide support and coaching, which means that they may be coming into your child's classroom from time to time to teach a model lesson, but it also means that they may be working with the teacher outside of class to plan lessons or to collaborate with their entire grade level team to plan that instruction. When we think about our gifted students and why we identify them, we know that they have certain characteristics. This model by Bertie Kingor is called the Kingor model that we use when we are describing our students, and we want to look at, we call it the has a map model. You can see that there's an acronym HASAMAP: humor, advanced language, sensitivity, accelerated learning, meaning and motivation, analytical thinking, and perspective. Gifted students display those characteristics in different ways. For example, you may be thinking, my child is funny, but I don't know if he's uniquely funny. In many ways, that humor displays itself when their humor is mature for their age. Maybe they pick up on adult sarcasm. Gifted students are also likely to have advanced language. They may use vocabulary that is advanced for their age. They make connections that other students don't make. But I want to point out to you that just because those students display those characteristics, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have every single one of these characteristics in every area every day. Like all people, they have relative strengths and weaknesses. I also would point out that there are many times when gifted students may not always be model students. For example, that meaning, motivation, and analytical thinking, they may have intensities, areas of interest that are of particular interest to them, and they may have a hard time transitioning away from a preferred task to a task that is less preferred. And also keep in mind that our students are identified in general intellectual ability, which means that globally we consider them to have high ability, but those strengths can be relative, which means that they should encounter from time to time areas that are more of a struggle for them, particularly as we progress in that gifted curriculum. What we are hoping for is that the students will always be experiencing some level of challenge that is just beyond their reach. For some students, this is a little bit uncomfortable because they are used to being highly successful in all areas. So keep in mind that even though your student is identified as gifted, it doesn't mean that everything will be, that academics will always come easily for them. It also means that in some cases, there could be other challenges, but also benefits. Gifted students tend to be highly sensitive in the sense that they are very in tune to how others are being treated. For example, gifted students are likely to take to heart criticism of themselves more directly, but they also tend to do that on behalf of their peers. So again, gifted students have a lot of gifts, which is why we call them gifted, but they also bring a complex intellectual package into their learning environment. But that is part of the reason why we want to make sure that we've identified those students and provide those services. We use a concept-based curriculum that overlays our standard curriculum. The concept-based curriculum is designed to connect ideas that we refer to as TUBA to the total curriculum, in that the ideas, the concepts are connected to more than one subject. So they may take a concept and use the same concept to connect to their reading language arts and their science curriculum. Here in this picture, this is a picture of Lynn Erickson, who is a person who developed this concept of TUBA, which is something that we teach the students, where concepts are timeless, meaning that a concept is broad enough so that it's not locked into a particular period of time. It's universal, broad, and abstract. So as students are learning about concepts, they learn about big ideas, and those big ideas are used to shape their instruction. We've identified a key concept for each level of the grades where we provide direct services. There's a third grade concept, a fourth grade concept, exploration and communication of the third grade concept. The fourth grade concept is change. Fifth grade is system. Sixth grade, change again. That's because when they go to middle school, we do have to do a reset, not just because of their gifts, but also, I don't know if any of you have sixth graders, but that is a whole new world for everyone concerned. And then perspective and conflict. So still conceptual, but bring in more complex ideas. The concept curriculum isn't subject specific. It really is about making those connections. And it's important for the students to be able to apply their learning across multiple settings. Also, because that's how we use ideas in the real world. And we ask them to make generalizations, a relationship between two or more ideas. Here's some generalizations that are part of what we typically use in our third grade curriculum, that inquiry may lead to exploration. If you are exploring, you have to ask questions, or the reverse. Perspectives may lead to conflict. So you can see we've used our concepts here to make generalizations, but your students can do that too. We also talk about essential questions. How do they make those how do they know what the relationships are between those big ideas? And all of this is very, again, because it's a concept, it's very abstract, but for our students, we're connecting it to the same curriculum, the same ideas, the same SOLs that are appropriate for their particular grade level. What does it look like? in my child's gifted cluster classroom. Obviously, I think there are 300 different gifted cluster classrooms, so I can't tell you what is happening in your child's exact classroom, but in general, these are some of the things that we would expect to see. If you look at our graphic, you see that the goal would be for the students to be the experts and the teacher to be the guide. So you would see the teacher as a facilitator. You would see active engagement, student collaboration, problem solving. We would like to see them using inquiry-based learning and using different tasks, working on different tasks simultaneously. So you may see different students doing different things, but still aligned to the same standard. And I would also point out that although these are things that we particularly want to incorporate into our gifted education, this is an expectation and what you will likely see in many classrooms, because one of the things that we know that practices that benefit gifted students benefit all students. So hopefully you would see these things in any classroom that you encountered. As I mentioned, our gifted students are all different. Not only are they different from many of their peers, they're also different from one another. Giftedness looks different for different people. I have a very gifted team of people that I work with, and they all have different approaches to similar problems. In this particular cartoon, you can see that sometimes students have trouble understanding one another just because they take different approaches, but that's part of this idea of providing them with opportunities to expand their perspective. In Virginia, we have an initiative called the Profile of a Graduate, which includes the 5 C's: critical thinking skills, collaboration skills, communication skills, citizenship skills, and creative thinking skills. In our model of gifted education, we try to incorporate those 5 C's into all the pieces that we build. To differentiate the 5 C's, we want to prepare our students for success, not just in school, but also in the wider world. So we want to talk about a few of the strategies that we believe are beneficial to students who are beneficial to students. So these are just a few examples of different strategies that we employ. So you might hear about some of these when you are talking to your child about the learning that takes place. We're going to talk about 3 tonight, but obviously there are any numbers of strategies that are available to students. The first one is called Scamper, and you take a common object and you describe it. You use different ways to describe it. So you can substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to other purposes, eliminate, or rearrange. In this example, the students were asked to scamper the idea of an Oreo. And actually, this wasn't the students. You all will recognize that these are all products that actually exist. So the concept of scamper has its basis in creative problem solving that's used in the business world, but we use it with our students and we ask them to do similar things. So you could do this with any object, and you can actually even do this at home. So in this example, we know that an Oreo, we have the traditional Oreo, but we also know that right now we have the pumpkin flavored Oreos. We have Oreos that are used for other things. We have them in ice cream. That's how they're combined, adapted, modified. So the more that students are asked to process and use information in unique ways, the more neural pathways they develop, and the more likely it is that they will, number one, hold on to the content that we're teaching, but also it will give them an opportunity to apply that information in a way that makes the most meaning for them. The second strategy that I want to highlight tonight is synectics, which is actually one of my favorite strategies personally, but it's also one that's easy for you guys to use at home with your students, because you can use this language, this type of questioning to talk about anything that you have at home. Synectics are forced associations between 2 or more dissimilar concrete or abstract nouns. So you can ask your child about anything that they learned in school and connect it to anything that you have in your home. Using this characteristic, students can think critically about the relationships between what they learned in school and something with which they are already familiar. It involved discovering those connections and to really make connections that maybe they didn't make before. So here's one for you guys to try. Just in your head, since we're in a webinar, we can't really have you answer out like we would if we were in person. But I'd like for you to think about for just a second how a conversation with your gifted child is like fireworks. Some of you are probably, and because I've used this synecdoche before, I'll give you some examples of things that people have said in the past, and there may be some that you have come up with yourself in this conversation. You might say that it's unexpected, that it is full of color, that it is sometimes noisy. There are all different types of ways that you can make that connection. The other thing that I would point out if you're using the strategy is there are some things that come to mind right away. So if you're using the strategy with your kids at home, you might want to have them see how many they could make, like maybe set a minimum of 5, see if they can go to 7 or 8, because once you get past the things that are the most obvious to them, they will have to stretch a little bit more and dig a little deeper to find that information. So we have an example that is more content-based. If you're looking at science, pitch, which is a concept that's related to sound, is like Jell-O because it can be both smooth and soft. They both can wobble. They both can bounce off things. So we have the synecdoche, which is the verbal piece, but we also have the visual image of using my goodness, where we have the overlapping ideas, where we have two connections that overlap one another, but they can—
The Venn diagram.
The Venn diagram. Thank you. It's after 6. My brain shuts down. So you have the Venn diagram, so they can do it visually. Again, talking about how the students are different from one another. There are some students who will use a verbal piece. They can give you 35 synecdoches, but they may be less likely to draw it in a picture or to use a visual image. But that's okay. But there are a couple of things that we want to do. We want to use their strengths, but we also want them to develop in areas where they feel less confident. Here's one for math and social studies. Learning fractions is like reconstruction, because sometimes you just need to build on what you already know. Fractions are like reconstruction because you start with the basics. In this case, they're talking about reconstruction they're making a connection between math, fractions, and reconstruction. In this case, that's after the Civil War, not rebuilding your house, but rebuilding our country. This third one is an excellent one. The numerator would be the available jobs, and the denominator is the population. That's an excellent connection between those two ideas. Third strategy that I want to highlight, which is another one that your students can use at home. It's called mind mapping. And it's essentially a visual representation used to organize your thoughts. This format engages the analytical and creative processes and offers a synthesis between the parts and the whole. Mind maps are ideal for organizing thoughts prior to writing or synthesizing a main idea, brainstorming, using notes to study, activating creativity. So we have an image that is going to show a mind map of mind mapping. So here we have our mind map, and you'll notice that we start with our central idea in the middle. And then outside of that, we have the big ideas, which are in large print. And then as we continue to expand, we go out in different directions. In this particular example, they've used color to represent different things, and the lines get thinner. So this works well for more abstract and creative thinkers. There are going to be some students who will do a mind map, but only after they do a after they do an outline because they're more linear. And again, every student is different. I have a friend who's a psychologist who used to tell me all the time that if you met one student with autism, you've met one student with autism. The same thing applies to gifted students. If you've met one gifted student, you've met one gifted student. I know many of you have more than one child, and they may both be gifted, but they behave differently. Their personalities are different. So even though we are sharing characteristics and we're talking about the approach that we use to support all of these learners, please know that not every child is going to process and receive these services in the same way. And I say that as we begin to talk about how we're going to report progress to you. So you know that in school, when you're in school, at the end of every marking period, you got a report card, and that's still the case. And your child will still receive their standards-based report card that reports their grades in all the subjects that they're taking. In addition to that, for our students in grades 3 through 5, they will receive a quarterly progress report related to gifted education. And then for our middle school students, they will receive one each semester. But I want you to think about this progress report differently from the way that you think about that, those letter grades. This progress report is really just to give you feedback and to give your child feedback on how they're progressing in certain critical in those 4 areas of skill groups: the critical thinking skills, the creative thinking skills, independent learning skills, and group skills. So those are our 4 areas where we're assessing the progress of the students. And keep in mind that students are going to be in different places with those skills at the start of the year. Students may make progress in certain areas faster in one area than another. Also keep in mind that that teachers are reporting what they've observed, and there may be times when there have been fewer opportunities to observe their students completing those types of skills. For example, and I'll show you what the QPR is going to look like. When we talk about group skills are going to look different in our current environment than they may have 3 to 5 years ago. So in that case, that may be discussing how students collaborate, how well they are able to work on a project together using technology. And the other thing that I would keep in mind is that the idea is not for, and I'm going to advance so you can see what this QPR looks like, and then I'll go back. The idea is not for the student to always be at the highest level. The idea is for them to show growth, and to also keep in mind that every quarter doesn't mean they're not going to necessarily have an opportunity to demonstrate this ability in every skill and every domain in every setting. Let me go back here. So when we're thinking about our 4 areas of skill, when we're thinking about critical thinking skills, we're thinking about how do they process information, and what ways do they approach content? Are they able to look at information and make inferences? Do they make their own meaning, or are they waiting for us to make that meaning for them? Can they make generalizations? Can they take information that they read from multiple sources, or information that is taught to them in the classroom and connect it to something else? How quickly when it comes to creative thinking skills, do they come up with original ideas? Can they elaborate? When they're telling a story, do they include lots of detail? Are they able to think flexibly? If you ask them to change perspective, are they able to do it? For example, if you ask them to talk about why a particular person made their choice, are they able to present both sides? That would be an example of flexibility. That's a pretty advanced one, but that would be an example of flexibility. And then there's independent skills and group learning skills. So the independent skills, particularly, there is a certain segment of our gifted students who really struggle with the independent learning because they are used to things coming easily to them. So they may have some challenges with perseverance. They may be the child who gets very upset if you're playing a game and they don't get to win. They may also struggle with doing an assignment that is challenging for them, which again is kind of our goal. We want them to pick challenging things. For example, if you're thinking about what books they choose from the library, you want them to choose books that are of interest to them and that are within their reading range, but you also want them to choose some things that will force them to pick up new vocabulary. We want them to be able to think about their thinking. That's what metacognition means. For example, if there's something that they're struggling with, do they know? Can they assess themselves and think about what's hard about it for them? Are they thinking interdependently? Are they using their imaginations? Can they pose questions? And then there's those group skills again, cooperating with others, collaborating with others. One of the things, again, that some students are very good at taking the lead, and some students are very good, but there are some students who really prefer to do things on their own. They are more likely to, if given a group task, they may prefer to try to take it on all themselves. And we want them to be able to work both independently and with others, but in a way that allows everyone to have an important role. And that takes skill, not just on the part of the student, that also takes skill on the part of the teacher to ensure that everyone has both independence, meaning they're able to work independently, but also interdependence, so they're able to work with one another. And again, this is an example of what the content of those QPRs will be. The format may look differently because we're really trying to make it more user-friendly for the teacher and more user-friendly for you, the reader, but that content will stay the same. As we move on to the last ILO that we had tonight, the last thing that we want to talk about is how you could be involved as a parent as it relates to gifted education. Reassure your child that intense interest is okay. Everyone, I'm sure that many of you have students who have a particular passion that they've had since they were very small. There's something that they have always been interested in, whether it's trains or dinosaurs or some other issue, and that some other topic, I should say, and that interest is okay. But you also want to give them opportunities to expand that interest in a way that requires them to move a little bit out of their comfort zone. You want to speak with your child. You want to be able to confer with your child's teacher as you need to talk about what progress they're making, what they need, how they're doing, where they could improve, and where you would like for them to go. Allow your child to see how you express yourself creatively, and expose your child to new ideas, books, museums. Technology has really opened up our world now. There are lots of virtual field trips that we can take. I think that might be a project that we're going to take on towards in the winter, of maybe some virtual field trips that students can do over the winter break. Here's some additional resources and this presentation will be shared, so you don't have to screenshot this if that's something that you're interested in. So these are the 3 of the books that we use in our planning: Concept-Based Curriculum, Problem-Based Learning, and Understanding by Design. There is both a national and state associations for gifted children that have resources for teachers and for parents: the National Association for Gifted Children and the Virginia Association for Gifted Children. And both organizations have websites that have lots of interesting and useful resources, and there are also opportunities for you to join those organizations to advocate for the needs of gifted students. We also will have an opportunity in the near future for you to perhaps apply to become a part of the Gifted Advisory Board for the City of Chesapeake. So be on the lookout for those particular opportunities when they're presented. There are some other additional resources. We've had an emphasis on social emotional learning this school year. Ms. Trott, who's our host tonight, that's one of her areas of responsibility. But in talking about mindset, having a growth mindset, giving your children the opportunity to, and encouraging them to take on a mindset that will allow them to expand their thinking. The other resource that I have referenced up here is our Family and Community Engagement Center base, which is a resource connected to our school division that has lots of meaningful resources for parents. And you can find that on the Chesapeake Public Schools website. I did want to take 1 minute to talk a little bit about Parentvue system and the gifted acknowledgement. Some of you probably were able to acknowledge your child's gifted eligibility form in Parentvue back in the spring. Some of you may not have seen it at that time, or you haven't had the opportunity to do that. If you didn't have the opportunity to do it in the spring, that acknowledgement may appear in your Parentvue account within the next few days, because we do want to make sure that we have a verification that you are aware and approve of your child being participating in gifted services. And that would take place within Parentvue, which you can access either on your phone or through your computer. And once you're using that app, an acknowledgement screen would appear. You have the option to agree or disagree. I'm assuming that since you're here tonight and gifted, and your child is currently placed in a gifted education class, that you would agree. You would then acknowledge. You would mark yes in the acknowledgement page. And then after responding, you would be able to navigate to the documents tab. And many of you have already seen this tab, because the documentation that shows that your child was identified and also has both their assessment results and the decision you can find in Synergy. And we're just asking you to do that because it just helps us clean up our process. This is the first year that we used a Synergy acknowledgement process. So we've had some challenges with it, but we think that it ultimately is going to make the main thing that I felt was important. I wanted you all to have access to the information in a timely fashion. So this gives you an opportunity to download those documents and keep them for in your records, and you don't have to come back to the school to pick those up. I introduced you to our gifted specialist team at the beginning of the meeting, but I do want to share a few more details that shows what schools each specialist supports. Shift and so Chris Brewer, who you met, supports all of our high schools and the Chesapeake Career Center. Meredith Correa is one of our secondary specialists. She supports middle school. She supports Deep Creek Middle, Graybridge Middle, Greenbrier Middle, Hugo Owens Middle, and Western Branch Middle. Melanie Manning, another one of our secondary specialists. She supports Crestwood Middle, Hickory Middle, Indian River Middle, Jolliffe Middle, and Oscar Smith Middle. Molly Gettle, who's joined our team this year, Meredith joined our team this year also. She supports Carver Intermediate, Cedar Road Elementary, Chittum Elementary, Norfolk Collins Primary, Sparrow Road Intermediate, and Western Branch Primary. Selena Howard supports Crestwood Intermediate, Hickory Elementary, Norfolk Collins, because they are a primary school who also has third grade. So Selena supports the primary teachers at Norfolk Collins Primary. Portlock Primary, Southeastern Elementary, and Southwestern Elementary. Becky Meyer supports Deep Creek Central Elementary, Deep Creek Elementary, Rena B. Wright Primary, Truett Intermediate. She also supports our Virtual Virginia program, as does Chris Brewer. And if you all, I'll give just a minor description of how we're supporting our Virtual Virginia students. Because they are in Virtual Virginia, they don't have a Chesapeake teacher attached to them. So those students are getting service, they're getting their services through Schoology, but at times when they're not in their core classes. That's a little bit different from what we're doing with everyone else. And also Western Branch Intermediate is supported by Ms. Myers. Karen Palmer supports Georgetown Primary, Grassfield Elementary, Greybridge Intermediate, Greybridge Primary, G.A. Treacle Elementary, and Thurgood Marshall Elementary. And finally, Robin Perrier supports B.M. Williams Primary, Butts Road Intermediate, Butts Road Primary, Camelot Elementary, and Greenbrier Intermediate School and Greenbrier Primary. So I hope that we've answered many of your questions, and I will check with my team to see if there are any themed questions, any question that I probably didn't cover that they feel like I should share for the benefit of the group.
Looks like your team's done a fabulous job in answering questions this evening. So,
well, thank you all. And I will turn it back over to our lovely host if she has any final directions for us. If not, then we will say good night to you and thank you for spending a few minutes with us this afternoon.
thank you all. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the Chesapeake Public Schools YouTube channel. If you can give us until about next Wednesday to get that posted so we can do closed captioning for hearing impairments. And any questions that were not answered, I see some coming in. I'll ask our specialists if you could just hang on for just a few minutes and go ahead and try to finish those up. So if you have any pending questions in the queue, if you want to hang on, they'll respond to those. But yes, these are the specialists that are assigned to our schools, and you can always reach out to them independently as well. Thank you so much and have a great evening.